Welcome to my very first do-it-yourself crafting video. I'm going to show you guys how to make some wooden earrings today, decorated with some metallic scrapbook paper. So I love to jump from one hobby to the next constantly, so I am not a master of any skill. However, I am happy to share with you guys what newbie mistakes I have made along the way so you can avoid them. So this is me working on these wooden shapes. I bought these little wooden shapes off of Amazon. They already have little holes pre-drilled in the top so that you can just decorate them and hang them from an earring hook. Super easy, very lightweight, so you can make huge earrings in all different kinds of shapes. These come on Amazon in every shape you can think of, and I love them. They're very also inexpensive. The sides of them are always going to be kind of a darkish brown color. So I will usually go over the edges with a metallic marker. Right now I'm using an acrylic marker. This is Top Notch brand. It comes from Joann Fabrics. You just have to shake them up, and you saw me just press it against my silicone mat there. That gets the marker ink flowing through, or the paint flowing through the marker there. And you'll see me have to press on the end every once in a while as I go. Top Notch brand comes from Joann Fabrics. I have another brand, I believe it's called Painters, I get from Walmart. The king of all acrylic markers is Posca. I absolutely recommend Posca if you are interested in getting high quality acrylic paint markers. So in this case though, the edges of these wooden things tend to get a little rough sometimes. And really, since it's just a small little strip of color, there's not a big difference between using the generic markers or using the brand name Posca markers for these. And I'd rather use my cheaper markers when the edges could be rough and possibly cause wear and tear on them. So if I'm doing detailed line work on a project or writing on like a plastic surface, absolutely would go with Posca. For right now, these ones will work. Yeah, this is me. I accidentally glued one of them to my paper before I had done the metallic edging. Whoops for me, so I'm trying to fix that now. I prefer to put the metallic paint around the edges before I glue it down to my paper because I'm a slob, and if I am coloring the edges after it's already got the paper on it and I go over the edge, then I get it on top of the pretty paper and mess up my design. You can color the edges after you are done with the earrings. I just prefer not to because I am a bit of a slob when it comes to that. So this is me trying to fix my mistake there. But once I have colored all the edges of these, I'm going to use Modpodge to attach them to this scrapbook paper. Here is the scrapbook paper I'm using. It is this amazing holographic shine paper that turns rainbow colors. It's a lot of fun. So here's the Mod Podge I'm using. This is gloss Mod Podge. I also have some that is matte. This little matte one actually came from the Dollar Tree, so you can get Mod Podge pretty inexpensive pretty much anywhere. I'm using the gloss on these really for the inside. When you glue it to your paper, it really doesn't matter which version you're using because it doesn't show. I'm using the gloss because I have more of it in this case. So you're going to want to brush a real good layer over top of your shape, and then make sure it's pressed down nice and flat onto your paper. Now here, I'm a slob, I painted all over my fingers, so I have to be a little careful that I'm not touching the good side of the paper and leaving fingerprints all over the place. You can also brush the Mod Podge just straight onto the paper like I am here, and then just stick your shape on it. Probably make a little less mess that way. I'm just being a little conservative with my Mod Podge when I just paint it straight onto the shapes themselves. So once I have it pressed on there nice and flat, I'm going to go back over them a couple times and make sure that they stay flat. Sometimes your paper wants to buckle when it's wet or crinkle and pull away from it a little bit. So I'm just going to, after I'm done, make sure everything is still nice and flat and sticking into that Mod Podge. Now that I have them all on the paper, I'm going to flip it over and rub the back side and make sure it's all nice and flat and adhered to the shapes. I've got a few imperfections here on the paper. This is something you probably don't want to start with. Metallic paper shows every single imperfection. So I picked the hardest paper to work with. So I am using another one of my wooden shapes just as something flat to kind of rub the back of this paper and make sure that paper is flat and fully adhering to the shapes underneath. Now that I've done that, basically all I'm going to do is wait for them to dry. And now that they are dried, I'm going to use regular scissors to start cutting them out. You can use a lot of different things to cut these out with. I prefer to just use regular old scissors, but those can be hard to get details with. You can also use a craft knife, which is quite useful. However, I'm very clumsy with a craft knife, so I use that as little as I can get away with. I will do most of the cutting with the scissors. So you can see here, I'm just going to cut as close to the edges as I can get with the regular scissors. Now, it's not going to be perfect. I'm not going to cut around all those edges just right. I'm going to clean it up, especially around all those edges, with a pair of curved nail scissors. Those are cheap and easy to get a hold of pretty much anywhere. So I'm going to use those to do all the little details and clean up the edges where I didn't quite get it perfect with the scissors. Because you want to make sure your paper does not extend past the edge of the wood. You want it to be as perfectly even as you can get it. When it comes to the shapes that have a big hole in the middle that needs to be cut out, the craft knife is absolutely the way to go. I'm never going to get this done right with a pair of scissors, no matter how small. So I will use my craft knife. I'll make sure to use a cutting board underneath of everything. Before, I was just using a silicone mat. Those are super useful for all kinds of art projects because they can be cleaned up. Paint and glue and almost anything can usually be either peeled right off or very easily washed off. But this is a cutting mat. I actually saw some of these small versions at the Dollar Tree recently, so you can get a cutting mat pretty cheap pretty much anywhere. So I have cut the middle out with my X-Acto knife, and I have to go back in and clean up some of the edges because some of those edges aren't perfect. You can see I'm kind of running my fingers over there to kind of make sure those edges are lined up nice, and I'm trying to go back in from the top and cut some of it off. That really doesn't work as well as I discovered here. You probably want to just go ahead and leave it flat on the cutting board and just go over it again to get those edges just right. Next, I am going to make sure I poke out the little hole for hanging it from the jump ring at the top. Here's one of my newbie mistakes that you do not want to repeat. You want to make sure to poke that little hole out now before you add paper to the back side of your shape. In this case, it's pretty easy to tell which end is up on these shapes. But if you're working with just a plain circle or another shape where it's not obvious which end is up and you put the paper on both sides, you're going to end up having no idea where in the world that little hole was to be able to poke it through. So just, don't repeat my newbie mistake there. So I am going to continue cutting everything out and poking out those holes. I got a little smarter on this one because I poked the hole from the back side first where I could actually see the hole on the wood, and then I could flip it over and finish poking that hole out. I'm using my little nail scissors here, but you could poke that out with your X-Acto knife, with a toothpick, whatever you happen to have handy. It's not hard to poke through the paper. Now that I've finished that side, I'm going to flip them over and use the Modpodge to glue them on to the scrapbook paper on the other side. The fun part about dangling earrings is you get to see both sides of them. And I can do a little bit different thing on the front and back side if I want to. In this case, my scrapbook paper has that iridescent prism rainbow effect that goes in a stripe one direction. So I flipped each of these over so that on one side, that rainbow reflective stripe is going up and down. On the other side, it's turned so that reflective stripe is going more horizontally. So I've got a little bit different effect on each. Now you can see here, I got Mod Podge on my finger, and then I touched the earring and I left a spot and had to try and rub it off because, again, this is metallic paper and it shows every tiny little blemish. Not the easiest thing for me to pick to work with. Now that I've got them all glued down to the paper, I'm again going to flip it over, kind of burnish, flatten the other side of it to make sure it is adhering well to the shapes underneath. And then I'm just going to walk away and let it dry. You're going to want to walk away and let it dry for a few minutes between each of these steps with the Mod Podge to make sure it's fully dry before you move on to the next step. Now I'm just going to repeat the step I did earlier where I cut them out with the scissors, clean them up with my little bitty nail scissors, cut the holes out of the middle with my X-Acto knife, and then I'll be ready to do the finishing step. This is an important step before you finish these up, is to check and make sure the Mod Podge actually stuck everything together. Sometimes I'll discover that there is, especially around a corner, a place where it just didn't stick. So I'm going to very carefully check around all the edges and put some more Mod Podge in any places where it didn't stick. And I'm going to be very careful when I peel that back so I don't crease the paper and cause any marks in it. Now I'm going to add a final layer of Mod Podge to finish these. You could probably do this without the Mod Podge on the outside layer, but I like to give it that extra layer of protection because, again, this is just paper. So putting on a layer or two of Mod Podge is a great idea. Now, if you're working with something shiny like this, you absolutely want to use the glossy Mod Podge. If you use the matte, it's going to ruin all the shiny that is underneath of it and make that dull. So if you're using metallic or sparkles, you want to use the gloss. I want to use, in this case, a nice soft brush. You can see the one I'm using has a broken handle, but this is my favorite one to use for the Mod Podge. It's nice and soft and doesn't leave a lot of obvious brush strokes. So I always do a solid top to bottom stroke. I don't want to stop in the middle and leave edges to my brush strokes. I'm doing everything I can to make sure any thick globs or brush strokes are minimized. You'll want to watch the edges. Sometimes it's easy to miss the edges or to have the Mod Podge pool around the edges. So you might kind of want to look at it from different angles, make sure the light's catching it so you can see if that Mod Podge is in a nice even layer. Next, I'm going to let those dry, then flip them over and paint Mod Podge on the other side. But in the meantime, here's another newbie mistake for you. If you are making your very first DIY video like me, check and make sure there's not a ginormous smudge over your camera lens, which causes half of your video to be a great big nasty mess. How about I just, fix that real quick? Pardon me. Now I'm going to get out all the tools and materials I need to make these into earrings. I have a pair of needle nose pliers, and this is a little jump ring tool. I don't know if it has an official name. It's a ring that is used for jump rings. And I'm going to get out another pair of pliers here. These are round nose pliers. It doesn't really matter what type they are. You can open and close jump rings by using 2 pairs of pliers or a pair of pliers with that jump ring tool. Some of them are even soft enough to open and close by hand, which work okay for earrings. I would just be careful of anything that soft if you were making a bracelet or something that might snag on something and possibly fall apart. So I've got some jump rings here, just showing you about how big that is. I can use that with this jump ring tool. It's got these slots in it. So I'm going to use my needle nose pliers to just hold on to it. I'm just turning it until I can see where the opening is. I'm going to use the little slots in that jump ring tool to just twist it, and that will open up the jump ring. Here I'm using my needle nose pliers to help me thread that jump ring through the hole in the top of that earring shape. It's a little difficult because the gap between the hole and the edge of that shape is kind of thick. I probably could have gone up one size on jump rings, but it'll work. I just have to wiggle it a little bit, and then I'm going to twist it back closed. When you're working with jump rings, you always want to make sure you are twisting them open, not pulling them open. So what I mean by that is if you look at the jump ring, it is shaped like an O. You are going to want to twist the opening away from each other, kind of to the left and the right, but not pull them apart. If you pull it apart so it's open like a C shape, it's going to be really hard to push those ends back together. You're going to end up with a misshapen jump ring. You're always going to want to twist it open and then twist it back. So hopefully you can tell from the video what I'm doing here. So I've added a second jump ring. I looped it through the first one, and I looped my earring hook through that as well, and then twisted it closed, and that holding it all together. So now I have a finished earring. I just did that with all of them, and I now have several sets of finished earrings, which are very, very shiny and iridescent and awesome. I love them. So I'm just giving a quick show off of all the different shapes I did here. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if all goes well, I hope eventually to maybe make a couple more, show you guys some newbie introductory videos on some of the crafts that I do, so you can learn from my newbie mistakes and make some of your own awesome projects. So I hope I see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Here is some bonus content for the end of the video. Just in case I made things look easy, here's a compilation of me dropping things, because working with jump rings is very fiddly. I am not a coordinated person, so if you drop things, don't feel bad. We all do it. See you next time.